Oh, hi there. Today I wanted to pay my respects and talk a little bit about my interpretation of what happened on September 11th, 2001. That was 17 years ago today, and it was a significant event in American history, and there's a lot of really bad interpretations of what that day actually was. Um, I did a little bit of research, just some cursory, real quick research as to what the real problem was. Um, because a lot of people, it's easy to blame George Bush. It's easy to say the structural integrity of the towers was compromised from the inside, and that the structure of the building should have been able to withstand the planes crashing into them. Now that's open to debate because that's architectural physics sort of stuff, and all that kind of information can get blurred when presented on any social media platform. In fact, it does quite often, and people mock September the 11th, and there's some psychological reasons why that is permitted. I personally don't, and there's no point in arguing with these people because what they're trying to do is misrepresent the facts so that you're distracted from what the real problem was. Uh, George Bush, in no way am I defending. He had his pants down on this one, and you know, the thing is, George Bush, even before he became president, was a military leader. To say that no, he was only one when he became president is retarded. There are probably 2,000, 3,000 generals within various ranks in the United States Army. There just are. And when he became president, of course, he became uh, the commander in chief. That's right. He became that, so he took the blame for it. But for years, um, there had been a secret program um, of undetectable nuclear submarines with um, the Chinese Communist Party. That's what we call them. We don't know what they're called. Um, us common folk, it's just easier to call them the Chinese Communist Party. They're not communists, not even the slightest. There's no such thing as communism. Communism doesn't exist. Um, I mean, the nice fancy words Karl Marx had said, that's one thing, but as far as an actual country that was communist, doesn't exist. North Korea, not communist. Soviet Russia, not communist. It was just a different word for the structure of hierarchy and authority. And they were assholes in other ways. I mean, the United States over the years has been, a giant prick, but they weren't assholes. Assholes are more like the Chinese Communist Party. We'll just call them that because it's easier. Um, they developed undetectable nuclear submarines, and I tried looking up on my internet server anyway. When was the first sighting of an undetectable nuclear submarine? And I believe it was in the mid 2000s. So that would have been after September the 11th, 2001. That's when they admitted there was such a capability that an enemy uh, behind the scenes, very aggressive tactics enemy had a weapon of such kind. That's when they admitted it. They admitted it later on. But the truth is, undetectable means secret, which means it came about beforehand. And the United States was not ready for it, and they didn't see this thing coming. And various military leaders, and this includes John McCain too. He didn't just arrive on the scene, and it's got nothing to do with him. It has to do with all the politicians that were in power. Hillary Clinton is just as much to blame. Bill Clinton's just as much to blame. They're all just as much to blame for allowing this security breach. And what it was is they had to turn around and justify a war that was Iraq, that, you know, that's a whole other can of worms because they needed the oil. I made a video stating I believed Saddam Hussein was still alive and that he cut a deal with the Americans to invade his country because the Iranian military machine was growing too fast. And you'd be retarded to think the Iranians still don't hate the Iraqis. And with their nuclear program, getting active, Saddam Hussein, he had to get the fuck out of there. And of course, because everyone's crazy in all these sort of places and people are crazy everywhere, not all the generals were going to agree, and it just created one big clusterfuck in the Middle East. But they needed oil because that was China's weakness. They didn't have enough of it. And obviously, it's mutually assured destruction if they were to pull anything like that. But they could have slid in through the harbor and exploded a bomb of a kamikaze crew of undetectable nuclear submariners, right next to the Statue of Liberty, and completely destroyed New York, the entirety of New York. Imagine how many people would be shitting their pants if that's the story they heard. So they distort it. They distract people with, stupid stories. Because, naturally, with a significant event like that, people are going to be curious, especially, pseudo intellectuals and whatnot. There's probably about 30, 40 hours of idiots talking about structurally how, it was an inside job because the building should have been able to withstand um, the crash of the planes. Well, the problem with your logic is those towers and all of New York could not withstand a nuclear weapon. And that was the real threat. So what happened? Why is George Bush somewhat to blame? Because he cut a dirty fucking deal. He said, we'll hold down our arms, our Air Force, and they probably have been hammering out this deal for a long time, because who knows how long these undetectable nuclear submarines have been, at the Chinese disposal. And they may have received bad intel from their satellite states. And, people don't like to look at it like that. People like, you'll get that dumb bitch, Claire Newel, who will say, oh, I'm going to Hong Kong and everything's pleasant here. The Hong Kong government hates the Americans. They hate the CCP more, the Chinese Communist Party. But the thing is, the way they look at it, with the artillery and the weapons the Chinese have, and how close Hong Kong is to it, they're basically, on the front lines, and they're going to get obliterated. And the Americans, we're far enough away that, that's not. We'll see a missile coming, even if it is one of their supersonic missiles that just flies really, really fast. They won't have that luxury, though, because as I said, with nuclear weapons, you only have to be close to the target, and that's good enough. And it's not that their military is particularly advanced, and I'm not going to say that all of their political and military leaders are insane. Some of them are, though. But there are some that are so rich that, although the peasants and China's image in the world, doesn't look particularly spectacular because it's not, they themselves would have nothing to gain by a direct war with the states. So it's actually factions within an enemy country that inhibit such kamikaze submariners from showing up with a nuclear weapon of some sort. And, like, you still got to spin a story for the regular idiots who just aren't trained in this type of thought. And, it is terrifying that an undetectable nuclear submarine could just show up. I mean, if you want my advice, you'd move to somewhere like Saskatchewan. There ain't no money there, but at least you wouldn't have to worry about undetectable nuclear submarines. But that's, delving into a little bit of paranoia. I wouldn't be too concerned about that because there's just too many strings attached and things like that. And there are too many billionaires, although are the most despicable people on the planet in Asia, and some of the ones over here are pretty bad too. Um, that there's just nothing in it for them personally to gain by, mutually assured destruction. As I said, I did a little bit of cursory research because I wanted to find out when exactly they said the first one was, because I don't know offhand. I try to do as little research on the internet as possible. And for the first three Google pages, which is really all that it's worth, after that it just trails off. It's all about the Russian undetectable nuclear submarine program. Um, and then they made one a story about how a Swedish vessel could take down a $6 billion um, you know U.S. I guess it was an aircraft carrier or something like that. And then they mentioned North Korea, and North Korea don't have a submarine fleet. As I said in another video, North Korea is a metaphor for China, the poor parts of China that do not like um, the Americans for various reasons. And actually, Kim Jong Un, uh, you know, during his time, it was uncertain. Uh, I'm talking about Kim Jong Il as to who was going to be the dominant superpower because he must have thought the Americans are stupid. Look how easily we caught their spy ship. That was an embarrassment. The Pueblo incident. That was, oh, for fuck's sakes, did that make us look dumb? Um, so it became a question of, is it the Chinese or is it the Americans that are going to win? And, um, Kim Il Sung, Kim Jong il's father, although I don't like him because he was against us, there are people I dislike even more. So I'm not complimenting him, but I'm going to say not only did he stop the Americans from crossing, the DMZ with the help of the Chinese, but he also turned around and told the Chinese army to fuck off. So, that's that's half a compliment anyway. He told the Chinese to fuck off, and he was right to do it. And the thing is, uh, like North Korea is a bit of a pipsqueak country, and it's mostly mountainous, so they'd be difficult to fight. But you know, they didn't really want to get destroyed. So it's all about balance. And the problem with that is that sometimes South Korean intel uh, gets leaked to the North Koreans. North Koreans turn around and tell the CCP and all the other rivaling military factions in Asia. Because guess what? If you think it's one unified country, you're fucking wrong. On paper it is, but in reality it is not. And all this information gets spread around Asia, and the Hong Kongers will barter with information. Um, it works both ways. Sometimes they give the Americans information, sometimes they give the CCP the information. And it is my personal belief that a secret government organization within Hong Kong deliberately misled the Americans on the status of the undetectable nuclear submarine program issued by the Chinese Communist Party if the Hong Kongers, they themselves, did not leak information on how to build it and contribute building it, certain individuals from Hong Kong. And let's face facts, Hong Kong is in a position where the only thing that's protecting them is that if they get destroyed, somebody will destroy the Chinese Communist Party afterwards. That's not the greatest reassurance. It just isn't. Like the fact that someone will avenge you after you've been blown to smithereens, is not very comforting. But of course, there's way too many people over there, and they'd like to all come over here, and we're like, no, 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 you're not coming here. I mean, there are a lot of them in Vancouver, but it's just you're not all coming here. You're not bringing all your grandparents, uncles, aunts, and things like that. It's just not happening. I don't care how friendly Justin Trudeau appears to be. That's the truth. And you know, getting back to Iraq and why the Americans blamed the Iraqis and blamed Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein. Similar politics happen in the Middle East too, although, they're less sophisticated at it because they're just a bunch of tribal factions that have hated each other since the dawn of time. Um, but they needed a story to distract people from the truth and to, you know, add a comedic value to it, as you will see on Facebook and other places. It eases the tension of the local populace, and while they're distracted thinking of other things, they won't understand what the real issue is. And the Americans, they needed oil anyway because North America is just not particularly oil rich. We have a little bit of oil, but not that much. Um, yeah, so the invasion of Iraq was part of that. And I remember a father, he must have put up money or something like that, or he put in a request, which means he probably put in money to have his name put on a bomb, uh, or his son's name put on a bomb that was to be dropped on Iraq. And that was at the time where he figured the Iraqis were involved in this particular situation. Now, it's not that they couldn't have been involved. It's just they were doing other bad things at the time. And, the father later figured that, well, the United States lied to us, George Bush betrayed us, and my request was, I was taken for a fool, and it was dropped on innocent Iraqis, which is what happened, but it's part of a larger combination of things that happen. Because yes, 5,000 Americans perished in at 9/11, and most of them were innocent people who didn't see it coming. Um, However, very many more have perished in the Middle East since then. Most particular Pakistan, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Iraq. But the Americans had to go there because they needed the oil. They can't allow the Russians to have their supply of oil, although I think they probably squandered a lot of theirs over the years. They definitely didn't have the reservoirs of it that they had back in World War II times. They just didn't, I don't think they have it anymore. Um, but we're on somewhat good terms with them. Not completely good terms with them, but, better with Vladimir Putin. Um, there's still elements of Russia that don't like America, and there's still Americans in positions of power that don't like the Russians for various reasons, and that should smooth over time, and things will be all peachy. Um, yeah, so getting back to who I think is really to blame for 9/11 is the Chinese Communist Party. They said, look, we got an undetectable submarine. We have a bunch of brainwashed kamikaze styled submariners that are going to go over there and detonate this weapon, and we can't stop them, or we're pretending and being very convincing that we can't stop them unless you agree to our terms, which was part of the combination of the Americans being allowed to go to Iraq to get the oil, save Saddam Hussein's bacon, even though he's a bad guy, right? But you just gotta face facts. People in power are bad guys. That's just the way it is. You think the Iranians are nice people? No, they're not. Like Ahmadinejad, whatever his name is, I wouldn't trust him with a packet of cigarettes, let alone fucking the capability to make a nuclear weapon, of which he probably actually has. Um, and, when the Americans went to Iraq, they brought a nuclear weapon with them. Most of the low level soldiers don't know that because the reason they have it there is in case everything gets fucked up, they flick a switch and everything blows up. It's kind of like the movie Outbreak, where they'll bomb their own positions to stop the enemy from advancing or whatever problem from happening. And, that's not very comforting at all, is it? I made a video about scorched earth and why I also think that's another deterrent from an invasion of North America by uh, crazy soldiers, is because if there is nothing to gain by coming here, there is no point in coming here. And, you have to have people who are a bit foobar in the head to make those kind of decisions, but who are restrained for obvious reasons, so that, it's a deterrent from, other places where there are more crazy people rather than sane, rational people who don't want to see the world, doomsday and all that kind of things. Because there certainly is enough nuclear weapons to do such thing today, if in the wrong hands. And sometimes they have been in the wrong hands, in the hands of incompetent, stupid fucking idiots. The Soviet Union in particular, oh, when they started losing power, oh, did they fuck up big time. Countdown to Zero is an awesome documentary. I highly recommend you watch it because there are nuclear weapons out there and like nobody knows where they are or what, for all we know, there could be a nuclear weapon in the sewer system of New York that was placed there by the Chinese Communist Party, and they will detonate it if the story gets out. They're all kamikaze. They're self-sustaining in the sewer, and maybe they built some sort of umbrella corporation underground type research facility there. I don't think that's what happened. I'd like to think that's not what happened, and it doesn't sound like that by the general sound of the media. It sounds like, that their power is weakening, that, a long drawn out trade war, as they call it. Uh, they focus on trade, but really it's a war. It's a different type of war, but that's what it is. It seems that the Chinese are weakening. That's not what we heard around 2000, though. We heard that it was going to be the century of, it was going to be China's century because, for the last 100 or so years, it's been the humiliation of the Chinese, century of humiliation. And I actually went out and bought that documentary and it sucked, but the name was cool. Century of Humiliation. That's funny. But no, back to a serious subject here. Okay. So there was a whole combination of reasons why that happened. And the thing is, why would the Chinese be motivated to send a kamikaze crew that they claim, oh, we've lost control of them, they've gone rogue? Why would they bother doing that? Well, because America fucked up on that one and didn't see it coming. B, because I wouldn't be surprised if the Japanese, the Hong Kongers, the Taiwanese, the South Koreans didn't let the Chinese in on that technological basis to allow them to do such thing, and then they simply lied to the Americans about their intel. Um, because they're loosely allies. That's the thing a lot of people don't understand. They go, "Oh no, it's great. Blah, 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 blah. Let's go to Hong Kong and things like that." Like Nancy Newell. No, I'm not walking into that haunted house. You can walk into that haunted house if you want, but I'm not doing it. And if anyone asks me, I'll tell them it's a haunted house, and I'll tell them why it's a haunted house, and I'll tell them why you're telling them it's not. And oh, it's all being hung by the thread. It's all by a thread. It's so easy to destroy the fabric of society with just simple logic. It's not hard to get onto this train of thought of, well, what is it really? Because they've made the media so stupid, and that's the problem, is that people just get frustrated. They either, drop it and go, fuck this, I want to learn how to build a car, or, a hot rod or something like that. and they lose interest. But then there's some people, who have to sit at home all day long because they got a sore throat like I've got, and they go, well, I wonder how are things, how's the world really about, and what am I seeing? Because I'm obviously annoyed how stupid the fucking media is. Like, it's just like mind-numbingly irritating. And that's because the simple fact is they don't want anyone knowing anything. And they certainly don't want anyone knowing that they fucked up big time. Because some people would get it in their head going, okay, George Bush fucked up on 9/11. A lot of fucking American officials, and not only that, Canada also is involved in military exercises with the Americans. They don't come out and say it, but they are, as well as the United Kingdom, Australia, because those are also, part of the axis of the Western powers. And, they all drop the pants on that one. And, there are some people who, if they knew what had happened at 9/11 was their fault, just because of their incompetence, um, yeah, people might, turn on them, like George H.W. Bush had said, something like chasing them down the street to lynch them, something to the effect of, he said. Like, we have no idea how long they were bartering this shitty deal with the Chinese for. Probably a long time, and I do directly blame them because, as many people say, how did Osama bin Laden, a guy who shits in a bucket and, has a rusty AK-47, how did they get a hold of American planes and the American Air Force didn't stop them? How did that happen? How does America use, a multi-million dollar plane to bomb a $10 tent, as quite often is said? They're showing their military prowess, which is important so that you tell your enemies, the real ones, which the common everyday man doesn't have to know because they're too stupid and afraid and, pathetic to understand what the real problem is, uh, that you mean business. And the Americans going into Iraq, very tragic, sad thing, but it needed to happen because if we were just going to sit around here, well, the Chinese were plotting to get us and we weren't going to do anything about it, but indirectly we were um, causing more of a problem by them by invading Iraq. And let's remember that the Middle East is next door neighbors with Africa. There are parts of Africa where there are resources that the Chinese have brought with them. They go on the humanitarian ground that they're building highways and structures and things like that. But really, they're taking rare earth metals. If they found any oil, they'd be taking that. Um, and unfortunately, the advantage that the Chinese Communist Party has is they make for more convincing kamikaze soldiers than Western guys do. No, 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 no. We don't want to blow ourselves up to thwart our enemies. It's like the last thing we want to do. But the way they do that is they program them from day one to, it's I compare it to like an executor, which is a Pokemon. Basically, it has multiple heads, and it's a tree that walks around, and whenever it wants to cause a problem, it drops one of its heads, the head blows up, and the tree continues moving around. And that's kind of like how the Middle Eastern government works. That's why there's explosions in Pakistan all the time. That's why there's explosions in Iraq and things like that. And it's not a respectable way to wage war, but you have to remember that these people don't care about that. They will do anything. Um, and it's just oh, it's a big jumbled mess, and it's not easy to explain. However, I've managed to explain a lot of it in under half an hour. So hey, got to give me some points there on that one. And I think it is important because obviously things have got to be turned around. the perception of Hong Kong, ooh, wonderful place where the majority of their population lives in tiny little cages and things like that. Wonderful place. Come visit this haunted house. Nancy Newell says it's great. She's got a smile on her face and she says it's great. No. You don't send in people who are just blind, ignorant into a place like that. And why should we? They're despicable businessmen. And getting back to those Hong Kongers who don't want to release their power and all that, who govern Hong Kong, some of them are in the shadows. And they are the ones who are responsible, at least partially. It was a group effort of what happened on September 11th. So take that all into consideration. And the thing is, I don't think we particularly have to be afraid of undetectable nuclear submarines because the American military leadership will have figured this out long before I did. And I'm sure there are everyday citizens who figured it out long before I did, that would have said, let's go over to one of the business sectors in Asia and like as I said in a video before, punch them in the kidneys and make them tell you how they built those undetectable submarines. And the Russians, first 3 pages of Google, remember I told you, were about how they have built an undetectable nuclear submarine. Now, the thing about Russia is, on contrast to China, is Russia's got most of everything what it needs. It can grow food, it's self-sufficient, its military is strong, everything is relatively all right for them, and Putin is a stable leader, which previous Soviet leaders were not, because they believed that, world conquest was the only way to be sure that nobody would be plotting against them, because they're all paranoid as hell. And yeah, so this is just one big mess. And I'm just a dude on the YouTube. So that's my opinion, is that no, it wasn't any Middle Easterners that were responsible other than, the actual hijacking. But I'm actually talking about the social political reasoning of why it happened. I don't think the Middle Eastern guys could have gotten it together on their own. Um, and, yeah, this is a very difficult subject. And as I told you, there's like 40, 60, 80 hours of people talking about 9/11, and they're talking about the mundane, stupid, boring things. And you actually get pseudo intellectuals who will sit through all that and think they're an expert afterwards, and they don't know the half of it. I'm not interested if the building structurally would have fallen down or not, even though the facts could be misplaced or misrepresented anyway. I'm not an architect. How the fuck would I know? I'm more interested as to why. Why did it happen? And, George Bush took the fall, and he deserved to on that one, because, stuff like that can't happen, obviously, and it did, but he's not the only person to blame. Like I said, people go, oh, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, they're not in the same grouping with George Bush because George Bush was president. No, 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 no. They're all in the same grouping, whether they like each other or not. That's irrelevant. So they are just as much to blame, although you will very rarely ever hear anyone call out Hillary Clinton, who had significant political power when George Bush was in presidency. No one blames her for that. Nobody blames Barack Obama for that. It's like they show up out of nowhere, and it's like, well, technically George Bush was the commander-in-chief, and he was at the time. So he is the head guy to get blamed, but guess what? They're all to blame because nobody thought of this particular scenario that was enabled the Chinese Communist Party to blackmail the American government. And, it was probably bartered away to be as small scale as possible. Um, but it was a horrible thing, and it could have been avoided had we had competent leadership. So anyway, uh, most of those poor individuals on September 11th, didn't deserve that horrible fate. And many people from the Middle East didn't deserve the horrible fate that became about them. They just led simple lives. They just happen to have, vicious, evil military politicians. And it wasn't their fault. And they weren't profiting from the oil or whatever resources they had. They were just poor schmucks in their own country. But, that's just part of the whole chain of things that have to happen because there are certain things that could happen and would happen in certain scenarios. And, it's just a bad way to explain a shitty situation. But anyway, I'm going to say, um, rest in peace. The people who suffered from September 11th. Um, Talk to you guys later. Have a good one.